Welcome to Keep Your Thrive Alive. I'm Mark Mulligan, and this is a space where I share inspiration, tips, and ideas to boost your mood, your energy, and your well-being. Today we're going to explore the idea of being a compassionate professional. To some, that might seem like an oxymoron, a contradiction. Joining me, I'm delighted to have Ryan Hargreaves. He's going to share with us why being a compassionate professional is so important to our holistic well-being. Now, Ryan is not your typical 27-year-old. He started meditating when he was just 7 and was teaching others by the age of 13. At 19, he was ordained a Buddhist monk. He's taught thousands of people individually and in groups how to cultivate a compassionate practice. Last year, he decided to embark on a new chapter in his life. He's now preparing to do an MBA and has his own coaching and events business. Ryan, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Mark. A pleasure to be here.
So today we're exploring this idea of a compassionate professional. Can you tell us what it is that you mean by that?
A compassionate professional is essentially someone who is cultivating this inner quality of compassion while being successful as a business person. And this idea of being a good person and a good business person actually go hand in hand, even though there seems to be some sort of paradox within that statement.
Fascinating. So most organizations have lots of courses on developing professional skills, but not so many on developing compassion. Why is it so important?
Well, compassion is super important on many levels, but there's kind of three main spheres of benefit. So the first would be on a personal level. Compassion is the overlooked tool to well-being. When we have compassion, we have a natural sense of well-being that comes from that. The second would be in our relationships with people. Compassion enhances those that are already good or neutral and removes a lot of the difficulties in bad ones. And the third area would be the impact that we are able to generate through having a compassionate mind as we develop our potential.
So can we take each of these in turn? How does compassion help us with our personal well-being?
Well, interestingly, if you think about a time when you felt connected to the people around you, you've been caring for a loved one, there is a natural sense of well-being that comes when we are in that state of a caring attitude. And so by cultivating compassion, we are able to then purposefully generate that internal sense of well-being that comes from having a good heart.
And what about the relationship benefits?
Well, in our relationships, often people describe feeling disconnected from the people they work with, for example. If we start to cultivate compassion, we have an empathy and closeness, which enhances teamwork. And it also enables us to be more understanding and have context when there are difficulties, because we are able to see the situation from the other person's point of view and we have a shared understanding of our experience.
And what about impact and realizing your human potential?
And often, our purpose is very much connected to our motivation. And if our motivation is limited to a self-interested motivation, then the sense of purpose and the ability to accomplish that comes from that is also limited. When we start to increase the scope of our motivation, that I'm not just doing this for me, I'm doing it for others, then our sense of purpose increases and we can carry it to many, many different tasks. Our productivity improves, we derive more sense of meaning, and there is much more energy because it is multiplied by the number of people you're acting on behalf of.
What is compassion from a Buddhist perspective?
Compassion falls in the category of virtuous minds, and it is essentially a mind that wishes others not to suffer or to free them from their suffering. And this mind is the response to suffering when we care for someone.
So it's a mind. Can you tell us a bit more about what you mean by a mind?
Yeah, this is an interesting one because from a Buddhist perspective, this is kind of, I guess, a fundamental. But normally when we talk about compassion, people think about doing good.
Yes.
The Buddhist aspect of compassion is more about thinking good as opposed to doing good.
So can you share with us a little bit about the difference between thinking good and doing good? Now, surely if you're doing good, it doesn't really matter how you're thinking.
There are many examples of people giving that may appear to be an act of generosity, but in reality their motivation is questionable. And we could say from a Buddhist perspective, they have not really given. So the mind is always more important because it creates the authenticity of the action, but it also creates the karma or the long-term effects of it.
And I guess also, if somebody is motivated by this compassionate mind, it leads to more generative behavior. So they're not just thinking about doing something in a particular context where they might be seen in a certain way. It's driven by this sort of like really deep-rooted motivation that means that it's replicated in lots of different areas.
Well, that's exactly the point. So the Buddhist training in compassion is you work on the mind and then the way you speak and act becomes influenced by that. And you check that they're in accordance with your mindset, but principally the main work is done within the mind.
So for a lot of people watching, the phrase compassionate professional might imply a contradiction. What would you say to that?
It can feel like, on the one hand, as to be a good business person, then we are going to have to conflict with some of our values. And then sometimes if we're being compassionate, then maybe in the world of business that can be perceived as weak, and we miss out on some of our professionalism. In reality, the two go hand in hand, because compassion is more about our mindset. As I explained before, it's a mind, and professionalism is about our successful behavior that is appropriate in context. And when we bring these two together, we get somebody who is motivated internally by compassion, but is acting in accordance with the needs of the business. And that is a very powerful combination.
So earlier you said that compassion is the overlooked tool for improving our well-being. How is it that we can use this tool?
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, when we have compassion, there is a natural state of well-being that comes while we're in that zone. What happens is that our attention becomes less focused upon our own personal issues, our own stresses, our own anxieties, and it becomes more aware of the people around us. That sense of connection leads to less isolation, it leads to less obsession over our own current mental issues, and it gets us out of our head. And in that space, we then have a natural sense of flow that comes that is hugely beneficial.
It's a wonderful concept, isn't it? And I'm curious, how do you make it a practice so that you can feel compassion for those around you?
So it's very much about checking and changing our mindset. There is a meditation called loving kindness meditation, in which we build a recognition that everyone around us wants to be happy and free from problems just as much as we do. And we cultivate those wishes for them as if we were wishing them for ourselves.
So moving on to the next area, how do we use compassion to improve our relationships at work?
One Buddhist master said, when we are alone, we should watch our mind. When we are with others, we should watch our speech. And although we're training in cultivating compassion, we also need to make sure that when we're in a live situation, we are trying to speak and act in a way that is in line with that intention. So one way of doing that is we think, for example, say we're in a meeting and there's somebody in front of us. We think, how do I speak in a way that my words are going to heal rather than harm?
Another great concept. And I'm sure that most people don't intentionally set out to harm other people with their speech. But how is it again that we can develop a practice to make sure that we're more likely to heal than to harm?
Yeah, so there is a practice which essentially involves, first of all, checking our intention. Is there an intention there I can have that is positive for that person? We then also check, is my speech going to heal or harm this person, and try to align our way accordingly. And then finally we check, okay, how can I say this in a way that they will actually hear it and it will have the intended benefit in line with my intention?
Really interesting. So I'm just trying to play this out in my mind like an example. So imagine if you had to make somebody redundant. And if you pause to sort of think about your positive intention for that other person, maybe to make it as painless as possible for them, or to set them up for the next part of their career. I imagine if you have that at the forefront of your mind as the person delivering that message, it's going to make a big difference for you as the person delivering it, but also for the person on the receiving end of it as well.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure.
And the final area, Ryan, how is it that compassion can actually help you in terms of achieving your human potential and your impact in the world?
So from a Buddhist perspective, compassion itself is a huge part of our human potential. We call it our Buddha nature, or our seed of the best version of ourselves. So by cultivating and growing our compassion, we become more aligned to our greater purpose as a human being that is not just based on self-interest, and we also increase the capacity of our mind as well. So, this interesting study conducted by McKinsey during the COVID pandemic showed that people who felt that they were living with this sense of purpose had a 500% increase in their personal well-being. And they had a 400% increase in terms of engagement.
Fascinating. And of course, your level of engagement and happiness and well-being directly translates into your productivity. I was reading an article in the Harvard Business Review, and they were saying that if somebody was very engaged, that their productivity was 2.25 times greater than somebody who's merely satisfied at work.
Yeah, fascinating.
And so, what is a practice that we could do maybe to sort of bring this to life?
Yeah, so one practice we could do is that in the morning, for example, we set our intention for the day. And I think there's a beautiful quote by a Buddhist master called Shantideva that articulates this very nicely. He says, "Therefore, in whatever I do, may I never cause harm to others, and whenever anyone encounters me, may it never be meaningless for them." So this sense of bringing meaning. And then with that intention that we sort of set at the start of the day, we then try to use it as a hook to then remain mindful of. So throughout the day we check, is my thoughts, are my words, are my actions in line with this intention that I've set myself? And at the end of the day, we then do like a little review where we sort of go through mentally the day and we check our actions, thoughts and words against this intention and then realign ourselves for the following day. And over time, that creates this growth in compassion, improving ourselves as a person, and then all the benefits that brings to ourselves as a professional also.
So Ryan, we're coming to the end of our conversation. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
I think mainly just to summarize that as we start to grow our compassion, we become, more happy, we become more centered, we feel more connected to people, our relationships with others improve, we become more mindful of our speech, and then we have a great sense of purpose. So that person transplanted into a work environment is hugely beneficial for the company because, they have a dynamic energy, they're charismatic because they're aligned with who they are, they're connecting with the people around them, they make decisions that are fair and are impactful, and they naturally draw out those good qualities in other people as well. And if they're in a position of leadership particularly, they will set a tone of mutual growth and understanding.
Thanks so much, Ryan. I found your insight and your unique experience as being a monk and your practical approach incredibly useful in terms of the impact of cultivating compassion in the workplace. And, I must admit, if I reflect back to the very first conversation that we had about doing this interview, and we talked about compassion and professionalism together, I think there was a part of me that thought the two of them were in conflict. But what you've done is you've allowed me to understand the wisdom that by developing compassion in a workplace, it helps us as individuals, teams, and the organization as a whole to improve our well-being, to improve our relationships, and to improve our overall productivity and impact. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you're interested in exploring how to cultivate compassion more in your organization, then please get in touch. Ryan has developed a thought-provoking and impactful interactive 60-minute Thrive an Hour, which builds on the ideas in this video so that you can create a more compassionate and high-performance culture. You can also find out more about Ryan and the other work he does at lifedesign-uk.com. Now I would love to hear from you. Please leave your comments in the section below this video. What did you find most interesting about this video? What do you think being a compassionate professional could do for you, your colleagues, or your organization? And finally, what are you going to do? I look forward to seeing you back here next month, and in the meantime, be well and thrive.